Yongoro di Bengasido, I see no one just be her hande and a kebido. Yonta hande, 41 copina le jangde. Yonta hande na fatadum kopama le darnde. Jokude gole, Haisame for marbe dole. Was the yode, Hasabo eden pole, Yaw men ko enen, Yaw men ko koye men, Yaw men ko bedon class, be ko bandira be men, be chali ko pinen, be kori ko pirten, men ko de don jambe chopude daddy men. I'm black, I'm proud. Loud for the people that remain in slavery and pain. I'm black, I'm proud, I'm here to sing out loud for the people that remain in slavery and pain.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay. Ready to go? Good afternoon. Jam ñalli. Mbaɗɗa. Nanga def. Shahalik. Ammoho. Hello and welcome. In case you didn't gather what that was, those are all the greetings from the Mauritanian local languages. Thank you so much for being here today at this webinar sponsored by the Mauritanian Network for Human Rights in partnership with the Ohio Immigrant Alliance. We are so thrilled for you to be here, knowing that people have busy lives and busy schedules. You being here today is a strong signal for your standing with the Mauritanian community. In case you've never heard of Mauritania, Mauritania is located in Northwest Africa. Often when I say in between Morocco and Senegal, it works. People can have an idea of where it is. Mauritania was colonized by the French. We got our independence in 1960. And since that point, Mauritania has suffered from a whole host of human rights abuse and struggles. We have two main components, or three. The ethnic group that has had the power since its independence to today is the Lido Arabs, or we call them Moors or Arabs. And then we have the Afro-Mauritanians, which are the Fulanis, the Soninkes, the Wolofs. And then we have the former slaves, also called Hartanis. Mauritania, again, as I said earlier, has suffered a lot of human rights abuse. The power is being held since the independence to today by the white Moors, or the white ethnic group, or the Arabs. In the 80s, we suffered mass imprisonment and jailings of our intellectuals who only dare to say there is something wrong here by writing a book about human rights abuse. In the early 90s to mid 90s, we suffered mass killings of our Black military soldiers. In the mid 90s, we suffered mass deportations where 100,000 Mauritanians were deported to Senegal and Mali, and some of them are still there to this day. And in 2011, we suffered what we call the administrative genocide, which is basically the government, when they're saying they are registering people, it sounds very innocent. When they're saying they're doing a census, it sounds very innocent. But the issue is, because of this census, a lot of Black Mauritanians have not been able to get registered, to get civil documents, such as IDs, driver's licenses, or something as basic as getting a birth certificate so you could enroll your child in school. This is just and then on top of that, all that stuff, we still have slavery in some parts of Mauritania. And when you're talking about slavery in a country, that's a very good reason to grant TPS or DED to protect people from being deported to that country. Mauritanians don't just suffer in Mauritania, they also suffer here. And Black immigrants suffer more than any other person with the US immigration system. It's not an American value to expect an asylum seeker who crossed the border with only the clothes in their back, who don't speak the language, who has crossed at foot through 12 countries and who has gone through a whole host of trauma, expecting that person to represent him or herself in court is basically setting that person for failure from the get-go. And that is not an American value, which is why we need universal representation for every immigrant that comes in this country, for every asylum seeker. We need a public defender program for asylum seekers because they're coming to the US so that they could seek justice. They're coming to the US because they have gone through so much in their home. They're coming to the US so they could seek safety. Black immigrants who represent themselves in court are 10 times more likely to lose their cases and get deported than people of other races. We have a nice program lined up for you today. We are very thankful for our wonderful guests. Councilwoman Shayla Favor is here, and we are honored to have you amongst us. We have the asylum seekers videos that we will be sharing. They were brave enough, bold enough to be able to tell their stories in these videos. And I'm gonna say this, telling your story is a secret to survival, and that's what they're doing. And this is the first step to telling that story. And we also have the wonderful Rebecca Stewart, who's an attorney who has fought tooth and nail for Mauritanian asylum cases and has represented them and has won a couple. We also have Shayla. No, we also have Sasha Novis, who also has represented Mauritanian cases, whose firm Otro Lado has helped a lot of Mauritanians with their cases and has supported with post-exit services. Additionally, we would like to thank Lynn and her wonderful organization, Ohio Immigrant Alliance, for everything she has done, and the whole TPS for Mauritania team that has stood with us. Because I feel like this has happened, this human rights abuse has happened in Mauritania for so long because the government has managed to keep it under wraps. And me and you together, we will make sure this word is out there, that no government, no system is allowed to keep structural racism, to abuse, kill, deport its people every single day for 60 years without being held accountable. And that's what we're here for. With that said, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Councilwoman Shayla Favors. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to join this conversation today. My name is Shayla Favor, and I serve as a member of Columbus City Council, where I chair the Public Service and Transportation, Housing, and Criminal Justice and Judiciary Committees. I am truly looking forward to learning more about the plight of Black Mauritanians today, and I want to extend my gratitude to the Ohio Immigrant Alliance and the Mauritanian Network for Human Rights in the US for all of their critical work, especially in organizing today's event. I'm going to speak briefly about Columbus City Council's efforts to support and protect immigrant and refugee families here in Columbus, Ohio. In 2017, my colleague, Council President Pro Tem Elizabeth Brown, launched the Columbus Families Together Fund, a program that provides legal aid and education to immigrant and refugee families. I am proud to carry this work forward on behalf of City Council for the next phase of the program. The immigrant and refugee community is essential to the fabric of Columbus, and we must continue to do all that we can to protect and support those who now call our city home. Prior to the global pandemic, the immigrant community paid over $345 million a year in state and local income taxes, $638 million in federal taxes, and spent $2.8 billion in the local economy. 1 in 6 children in Columbus has at least one immigrant parent. That's over 75,000 children that could potentially be impacted by aggressive immigration enforcement and the threat of deportation that ultimately destabilizes families. Because of funding support from the Vera Institute of Justice, with additional funding from Columbus City Council, we have worked with advocates for basic legal equity also known as ABLE, to ensure all people have access to true justice when facing deportation. The fund has provided immigrants with a chance to have a fair day in court with a lawyer, as well as someone to educate and counsel them about immigration law and relief requirements. Ultimately, this program helps restore dignity, humanity, fairness, and justice in the immigration system. We are also grateful for the work of organizations like CARE and the Our Lady of Guadalupe Center of Catholic Social Services, who received grant funding to provide Know Your Rights sessions, case management, and support services, as well as education programs to the community at large. Simply put, we know that immigrants who have legal representation in court are 10 times more likely to be able to stay in the country. We must continue this work. I'm happy to announce that the next grant application for the fund will be available tomorrow, April 7th, and will stay open through April 28th, 2021. The application and additional information can be found at columbus.gov/council/Columbus Families Together Fund, one word. Additionally, my office will host an information session on April 14th from 3 to 4:30 p.m. It will be virtual. I urge any organization interested in applying for this opportunity to contact my office. My legislative assistant, Anissa Lieben, can be reached at aaliban@columbus.gov, and my legislative aide, Tynesha Harden, can be reached at tyharden@columbus.gov. Thank you once again for this opportunity to be here with you all today, and I look forward to being a continued partner in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman Favor. We are truly appreciative of your work in the Columbus community. We are also truly appreciative of your availability to have open doors of your office for the community, the Columbus community in general, but also the Mauritanian community. And we are looking forward to finding out more about the funding and how we can use it to make Columbus a better city for all. Thank you. With that said, I would like to call Lynn to showcase the videos of the asylum seekers that they were, again, like I said earlier, brave enough, bold enough to be able to tell their stories through these videos.
Okay, bear with me. Just trying to find where I put the presentation. Shoot. I'm not the most technical person. I think I'll just go over here. I think I can find it over here. So this, can you guys see this? Do you see reclaiming our story?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
All right, then we're gonna move down. And this is the map of Africa. Do you want to talk about this at all, Houleye?
Yes, so basically we wanted to share the map of Africa and to showcase where Mauritania is on that map. If where you see the arrow, that's where it is. Picture it.
And it's huge.
It is.
That many
It's a big country, and it's only about 5 million Mauritanians, so it's a lot of land, and it's not too many of us. We were hoping that someday that we will all get along, and 5 million people is like less than New York City. I don't even know why we're fighting, but that's a whole different debate.
All right, well, we're gonna watch this video. Let's get into it.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. On calminam, on jurama, on beltanam. Min Mamadou Joɗo gominoɗo Mauritanie donnoɗo toñangue donnoɗo kadi holde guile nanguede sohe. Donc mi ari ɗo dewmin ndin ko Brésil mi ɓin ɗon 11 pays ha ngal Mexico ko tisona natirmi ɓe gaddimi Atlanto joni ɓooyi toon mi ronki dañde hollo no jaltirmi ɗum tagi rewɗo hande wadde remercier kadi mbaɗa remercier kamɓe yaadi maɓɓe woddi maɓɓe pelle Mauritanie dariɓe ɗo ngam wallude Mauritanaɓe dogɓe ron arɓe ɗo molade donc meɗi ɗo molade noon mais mi sohama nder to noon donc so sino wonano kamɓe Ali Houleye Thiam e wonde fedde mo ardinde donc mi wiyatami yaltata kono Moussa Sat tan donc ɓe jooɓ avocat ji kadi ɓe ƴettinimi bon kadi onon kadi ɓe mbawi rendinde kadi on saaha mbami yalti hande nder Amérique mbuɗemi ɗo so mbuɗemi ɗo ko Allah e kamɓe on calminama on juurama beltanama.
That's Mamadou. He's in Cleveland now, thanks to a lot of wonderful people. Not only was he able to get out of Adelanto, but he was able to pay a bond that really, he couldn't have paid without support from Haitian Bridge Alliance and so many people who really stepped up and helped him. So this is him getting out of detention in the middle of COVID. All right, now I think I'm going to try to do it on the link. I know this thing, anyway, let's just do it, but I'm sorry that link thing is bothering you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Oh gosh, shoot. I screwed it up.
Min mbiyetemi ko Oumar Gonel Touré komi Mauritaniajo komi dokɗo komi garɗo molade leydi USA nde Mauritanie noon gimmimi koye lawol les gardumi ne muusi ha maayi sabu noon sa yettima e leydi a anda leydi no woori a anda leydi no sifori a nanta haala a wawa windude ɗum koye caɗele e jeeya kadi sen ɓenni ɗon ko ɓuri wadde caɗele ko jogade loyar ko hunde mawde ndiɗo leydi min mi ari mi woni ɗon 6 mois mbiɗon keɓde loyar ko Allah e Mauritanaɓe wonɓe booloɓe fedde Mauritanaɓe nde ɗo min ko kamɓe darani kam haɓe balli kam e loyar nde kemmi loyar nde loyar o fof dogani kam ha Allah waɗi jaltumi.
Back to you, Houleye.
Thank you, Lynn. So basically that was Omar and Mamadou again. We are so glad that they were able to do this for us, for them to be able to tell the stories of the struggle they went through before they got lawyers and how that helped them fight their case and get out on bond once they had lawyers that assisted them with their cases. They were speaking Fulani, which is one of the Mauritanian languages. Of course, we tried as much as possible with the subtitles. I don't know how helpful those were. But again, what's the more important thing is that they are willing and brave enough to be able to tell the world what happened to them and why they came and why it was so important. I don't know if you got it from Omar's video where he kept saying lawyer, lawyer, lawyer in English. I think that part was clear and that message was clear of how helpful having a lawyer has helped him after he was in detention for months in isolation, where it was so hard for him to even communicate before he found our organization. I also would like to acknowledge my team members, Zainab Oussal, who is part of the Mauritanian Network board, and also Aline Lee and Sheikh Fall and Ahmad Jah, I'm not sure if he's here, and Baboy Jagana. These are the people we work with on a day in, day out basis, on a voluntary basis, trying to juggle full-time jobs and voluntary work. They are brave members of my team, and I'm so grateful to have them. With that said, I would like to move on with the program. I would like to call on Rebecca Stewart, who's an attorney who worked with Human Rights First. She's no longer with Human Rights First, but we're glad that she has found a job in Africa where she will be working with the United Nations in South Sudan, and South Sudan is so lucky to have her. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. So I was planning on going over the process of both how Human Rights First started representing the Mauritanians, as well as some of the difficulties in California and some of the successes that we had, which we were really lucky and thankful that we were able to have some successes last year. So I started at Human Rights First, which is based out of Los Angeles, that office. There's also an office in New York and an office in DC. And so they do asylum representation in the places that they're in. but because of funding and a lot of different things, they can't represent different Mauritanians that are in other places, and can't represent any clients. And so very often you get legal organizations that are able to represent people where they are located. And then once the clients leave, if they bond out of detention or if they move to be with a sponsor, they can no longer be represented by those lawyers. And so right off the bat, you have a problem where you might start representing someone, but the moment that they bond out of the detention centers, and Otro Lado is the most common one that we're talking about today, once they go to Ohio, once they go to these other communities, they can no longer be represented by the original lawyers. So I'm going to speak today about two different clients that we had. I've changed their names so that it's anonymous. One was Seydou. We represented him for about 2 months, and before we were going to go to trial, he chose to bond out. And that was, something that we can always discuss with our clients. And then the other client was Musa, and we actually obtained asylum for him. So I was just going to go through a little bit of the process of how that works. And my coworker at the time, Katie Zabansky, is also on the call today, and she also represented another Mauritanian who also received asylum at Otro Lado. So one of the first things about representing Mauritanians, which is more difficult than a lot of other countries, is that there are not a lot of interpreters. So Houleye does most of the interpreting, I think, for most of the Mauritanians in America. I don't know that that's actually true, but every time I ever asked someone for an interpreter, she was the only name I was given. And while that's an amazing thing that Houleye does, it's a huge responsibility on her shoulders to be the only person that has the hours in the day to sit down and say, I can be available at these times so that you can call and have these discussions with your clients. And so something that is really challenging in the Mauritanian community is that we need to create a larger network of people that speak both fluent Fulani and fluent English, so that more people are able to represent clients at different times in different time zones, when Houleye is busy. We were able to find a couple of others, and they were extremely helpful, and it was great to expand the community, but it is important that we build those networks so that there isn't just one person that these relationships are dependent upon, because as important as Houleye is, we want to be able to represent people, when she needs a day off. So that was a really big thing, that it was something that we had to overcome in the beginning, because we didn't understand how few translators there were. And even if you ask a translation service, they very rarely have a Fulani or Pular translator. And then when they do, sometimes they're from Senegal, or they're from places that Fulani is not their first language. And so the interpretation is not as quality as someone that's from Mauritania. One of the other really important things as attorneys looking into these cases is that having connections back to Mauritania are very important, both for the lawyers and the client, but also for the community. So if we are trying to, as Houleye was talking about, documents and ID documents are very, very challenging to obtain. And very often, even if they had them, they were stolen or lost. And usually they were not legitimately provided because they were bribed, or they don't have consistent naming, because of all of the different issues that were perpetrated by the Moors on the Black Mauritanian community in the 80s and 90s. And now they don't have correct IDs. And as Americans, we say, how is it possible that you could not get your birth certificate or a consistent name on your record? And it's because they, in order to get any documentation, they were having to bribe people in their local police stations, all of these things in order to get these documents. But then the documents would say whatever the person wanted to put on them. So they would have different names, they would have different birthdays. We've had clients with different birthdays, clients with their parents' names on them, just a variety of different issues. And that's a really big challenge in court here, because we have to prove that these people are who they say they are. And as someone coming from America, it's very challenging to say, Your Honor, they just don't have, these rules in the same way. And so we're not going to be able to prove to you that, these are the documents that exist at the time. And so when we can have better connections back to Mauritania in the communities and being able to connect with people, then we can potentially get the documents or get whatever originals might be in the country still. And so it's important to continue to build this community of people that still have connections in Mauritania, so we can continue to build that. One of the other issues that we have is that the US government takes the IDs that they have, and so we often don't even have the originals of their documents. We have, scans, or we don't have anything. And FOIA requests can often be very difficult. We do make FOIA requests for all of our clients, but it often takes months in order to get all of those documents. Another really important thing for our clients is sponsorships. And so sometimes they came to the United States knowing that they had, a friend in Columbus, or a cousin, or, a cousin of a cousin of a cousin, and they are able to put those people on their sponsorship. But often when the bond hearings are coming and the people are saying, oh, I don't actually have X number of money that you expect a sponsor to have, the judge will deny the sponsorship and say, I don't think that this is a legitimate sponsorship, therefore you cannot bond out. I don't think that this sponsor will, protect you in the community. And that's a really big issue. And so one of the other things that the community can do to always help is to make sure that if there are sponsors in the community that are available, or if they are able to connect with other sponsors. I think that it's very important to build those relationships as well. So in talking about our clients, we, for people that don't really understand the process, Adelanto is a detention center that's in the desert in California. There are a couple of detention centers in California, but a lot of the people that come over the border at Tijuana, or that they walk over on without inspection, they often go to one of the detention centers in California. Adelanto has benefits in that it has lawyer lines so that you can speak without being recorded. You can have interpreters, but there are many detention centers in California where you can't even have an interpreter on the line. If you try to connect someone else, like a second line, when you're called by a client, then it will either disconnect you entirely, or it will block your number from being able to use them in the future. And so it's a huge challenge, especially in the pandemic, to be able to talk to our clients, be able to have the correct interpreters, talk at their correct times. And there's just a whole host of issues. But when we are able to talk to them, getting the story straight and having those interpreters and those essential lines into Adelanto are really important. One of the processes that were mentioned is bonding, and it's a discussion in California, and especially in the Mauritanian community, whether or not it's better to bond out or whether it's better to have your asylum hearing in Adelanto. So generally what the preferred method is to have the bond hearing and to succeed and be able to bond out, and then let the client choose whether or not they want to wait and have representation in Adelanto, or if they want to bond out and have an asylum hearing much later on. So if it's a really strong claim, if there was slavery, and in Mauritania, one of the elements of asylum in the United States is the country condition. So whether or not when they go back, they will continue to be persecuted. And in Mauritania, you have really strong evidence that the country has a lot of racial issues, a lot of class issues, a lot of rule of law issues. And so generally, if the client's story is consistent and legitimate and severe as they very often are, you have very good chances of obtaining asylum. But when you're telling someone, I think that you should stay in detention so that we can have this hearing, rather than get out and go into the community and hope that in 2 or 3 years you can deal with that, very often people say, I want to get out. And that's a really legitimate thing to think about and to know that your client is concerned with. But as a lawyer in California who knows that I can't represent them in 3 years in Ohio, it's a discussion point and really a concern about whether or not they are able to, make the best decision, or whether it is, for fear of maintaining being in a place where there are rampant pandemic issues. You have isolation issues. You do not have people that speak your language. There's just a whole host of problems. But in California, as Houleye mentioned earlier, a lot of different organizations that are really working to improve these issues. And so when I was working with Human Rights First, Esperanza was the organization that helped us find the different people within Adelanto in order to reach out to them and say, hey, do you need representation? Do you want a lawyer? And a lot Haitian Bridge often is helping us organizing how to pay the bonds. And it's really, it's a huge effort and organization in order to be able to represent the clients. So as I mentioned earlier, Seydou was one of our clients, and we had gone through the whole process. We were working on his papers. His hearing was in 2 weeks. And when I called his mom, who was living in Senegal at the time, I was just trying to line up his story. And I think that some of the things were not quite lining up with what he had said to me. I think he got a little scared that people within the detention center said, oh, like if she's getting different information from your mom, you should just bond out and let someone else deal with it. Like it's, don't admit anything. And I think that within the detention center, often, if there's a really small community of people that speak your language, you're going to trust them more than you're going to trust this person on the phone that you've never met. And so when I was saying, hey, I just want to clarify, like some of these facts aren't lining up, I just want to make sure that we get your story straight. I don't care what the story is, but we need to make sure that we're honest in our papers, in our declarations for the government. And I think people get scared and they get told different information. And so he bonded out. And I think it was because he wasn't comfortable enough with me as his attorney to say, I did overstate that, or I was scared. And so I was told to say that this was the case and this didn't happen. And so it's a really important element of this field to have the communities that can say, these are the people to trust and these are the people to be wary of. Because when you come into this country and there's one Mauritanian that you hear and he's telling you great advice, and you trust him, versus all of these people outside that you don't know if they're government or who to trust. It's really important to build those connections and relationships within the community so that they know we really are working on their behalf. And then some of the other things that we work with and deal with is that documents presented to the court, so the legal briefing, the country conditions, those were really essential in our cases. We provided country conditions that showed how absolutely abysmal the human rights violations are in Mauritania, and that there is slavery, and that there is jail without any due process. And these country conditions are really essential to be able to provide the judge legal cover in order to grant in our favor for asylum. And so providing those documents when you're going through the legal process are really essential. That's definitely like a lawyer specific element, but having those good protected grounds and legal arguments have been really essential in the cases that we've won. My one funny story is that we had a case that for Musa's case, we were in Adelanto, and there had been a lot of issues around the pandemic, and we were told that people were going to start being released. And so we actually got maybe some benefit from the fact that they were told that they had to release people out of Ambulanto. But we were in the courtroom, and we had a interpreter that we hadn't normally had, and he was from Senegal. And as I was watching the judge ask questions of my client and the interpreter interpret, I didn't always think that the interpreter was necessarily interpreting exactly what my client was saying. Now, I don't speak Fulani, so how would I possibly know this? I know my client's story. I know the way that he's speaking, and I generally have worked enough with my client and Houleye to understand like how he would respond to things. And so in one question, my client was asked, where did you live in Brazil? So as he flew from Africa to Brazil, because there aren't visa requirements there, that's very often where Mauritanians go before they move north up into the United States. He said, something in Fulani, and it was translated as, I lived someplace in Brazil. And I said, Your Honor, I'm sorry, I have to object. I heard the word Juma, and the word Juma means mosque in Fulani. And that's what my client said. And both the judge and the interpreter stared at me, and they were like, are you actually objecting to this translation from someone a language that you don't speak? And I said, yeah, I'm sorry. My client said something entirely different than what the interpreter said. And so the interpreter went back and asked, and he said the exact same thing. And so the interpreter, changed what his interpretation was of what my client had said. And I think that it put all of them on guard that, if you do not grant asylum, then I will challenge the interpretation in this case and challenge whether or not this was a proper translation. And we were granted asylum that day, and our client was released that day. And that's a big deal. But we did have this sort of weird moment in Adelanto where people were told to be released, and it actually ended up being a dangerous situation. So immediately our client was released without having any contact to his sponsor, without knowing where he was going. And so other organizations really helped pick him up and bring him to the airport and do all of these really amazing things that we as the lawyers don't typically do. There are rare exceptions where we will step in and help if we need to, but that's not our job. And in this situation, because he didn't have legitimate documentation of his birth and all of the stuff, trying to get on a plane to get to Ohio was going to be very complicated. And so once he got through TSA, he had missed his flight and didn't speak English, and there was no one in the airport. And so he got scared and ran out of the airport and ran 2 miles away to a hotel in a random town in California and asked someone to call me. And he called me, and I obviously still don't speak Pular. I knew one word. And so I had to call Houleye immediately and say, hey, something's going wrong. And thank God that my client met these people who saw a Black man in distress, and instead of in this country calling the police on him, they sat with him that night, and they put the room in their name because the hotel was refusing to give him a hotel because he didn't have an ID. So they put the hotel in his name, and we were able to pay for it, and they made sure that he had dinner, and the other organizations that worked got him onto the plane the next day. But like that took a huge amount of effort from a huge amount of organizations that were not the American government. And the government should have stepped in and said, we will help you once you obtain asylum, get to your location, we'll get you through TSA. And they did nothing. And it was all these different volunteer organizations that did it. And so there are a lot of things that come into play here, and some of them are specific to the Mauritanian community. The community that we have here in the United States, the difficulties that we have connecting back to the home country, the translations, and it's very hard to find experts on Mauritanian issues in the United States. But as we continue to build this network, we will continue to have better resources and better connections within in order to continue to work to support them legally. That's all.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for this presentation. It's very valuable for people to actually hear about examples and what all you guys have done, especially you. I was amazed that you actually called his mother to verify some of the stuff for, it's not every day that I translate for someone who's dialing internationally, trying to find a translator, doing a three-way call so you could corroborate some of the stuff. So it's amazing, everything you've done, and we're very thankful. With that said, I would like to call Sasha Novis, the other amazing attorney that we have amongst us today with Otro Lado that have also done amazing work with the Mauritanians. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Houleye. It's such an honor to be part of this event, and I just feel so lucky to have been connected to you and your organization. You all do such amazing work, so thank you. So my name is Sasha. I work for Otro Lado, which is a nonprofit organization, and we provide holistic humanitarian and legal support for refugees, asylum seekers, and other migrants, as well as people who have actually been deported back to Mexico. We provide those services on both sides of the border. So we have an office here in Los Angeles, as well as San Diego and Tijuana. And Rebecca gave a really great overview of the process for people who are seeking asylum and what those cases look like. So I wanted to focus a little bit more on the bond process and release and post-release services, which our organization provides as well. So I was connected to an asylum seeker named Hamadi, that's not his real name as well. And he had been detained at Adelanto Detention Center for at least 6 months by the time I was put in touch with him. And he had escaped slavery in his home country. He had not learned how to read or write, and he didn't speak English. He had traveled by land from Brazil all the way up through Central and South America and had learned some Spanish along the way. And I speak Spanish, so we were able to speak a little bit in Spanish, but for the most part, we needed an interpreter to communicate. And again, that was a huge issue because the detention center does not provide any interpreters except for court. And it's hard enough just to get somebody on the phone. And so I was very lucky that through some searching, I was connected to Houleye through the Haitian Bridge Alliance, whom we work with. And we were able to do some phone calls with Hamadi and find out more about his story and his current situation, because he was detained at Adelanto during the COVID, or he arrived before the COVID-19 pandemic, but the pandemic was already in full swing. It was really, really dangerous and continues to be really dangerous for the folks who are detained there. It is not safe. The facility has done, said they're doing certain measures to keep people from getting infected and separate them, but people are living in communal space. There's no filtration. The cleaning supplies were very toxic and making people really sick in other ways. There were several outbreaks over the past year. We witnessed guards not wearing masks, not taking the proper precautions. It was just really, really scary with the pandemic on top of the other ways in which detention is really scary and awful. So it was kind of an emergency situation for everyone who was detained there, and particularly anyone who had a previous health condition. And so we were doing our best to try to get people out as quickly as possible, while keeping in mind, like Rebecca said, that sometimes it is advantageous to actually complete the asylum case while in Adelanto, because the cases move much faster. Like they might be completed in a matter of months versus a matter of several years after someone's been released, just the way the courts operate in the detained setting versus the non-detained setting. So when I spoke to Hamadi, he was very clear. He wanted to be released from detention as quickly as possible. He was scared with the pandemic. He was not getting proper food. He was very cold. People haven't experienced these weather fluctuations like we have here in California. And he also was having trouble because he couldn't communicate with anybody. And he was experiencing, he could tell that like the guards and other people would be talking about him and he didn't know what they were saying. And there was no one there at the time to help interpret. So there was the isolation on top of all of these other factors. And so thankfully, Hamadi was granted a bond. Now, when we talk about bond, Adelanto is known for having very high bond amounts. So this is somebody who is an asylum seeker. They're in the United States for the first time. They have no criminal record in this case, and their community ties are through organizations like this. You know, they might not have family members in the United States. And the judge is supposed to take all of that into consideration. But what we're seeing at Adelanto is they're supposed to take all of that into consideration when deciding if they're going to release somebody and also what amount they'll require to be paid. But what we see is that $10,000 tends to be the minimum amount that is granted for bond. So somebody like Hamadi, who, you know, escaped slavery, has no money, arrives in the United States seeking asylum, is being asked to pay $10,000 just to be released from detention. And that's a huge amount of money, even for somebody who's here in the United States. It's absurd. And so without the help of people on the outside and community organizations, people remain stuck in detention. And the way that money works is you pay it, and then at the very end of someone's asylum case, it gets returned to whoever pays it. But like I said, once someone's been released from detention, that could be years. So there are community organizations that help pay the bonds. My organization, Otro Lado, has a bond fund that is for particularly vulnerable people. So like I mentioned, people with health conditions and people like Hamadi who had the language barrier as well. And so we were able to help post that bond and get him released, which was amazing. And now the story doesn't end there, because when someone is released from Adelanto, like Rebecca was saying, this is a detention center in the middle of the desert. There isn't a city nearby. When they release you, they give you the clothing that you arrived in, you know, from your journey. They give it to you in a garbage bag, and that's it. And they will give you your documents back sometimes. Sometimes your attorney has to step in and actually help negotiate that. And so luckily, there is an organization called the Adelanto Visit Network that's amazing, that helps coordinate both picking people up from detention. They provide a private taxi service, which again, we pay for, and also connecting people to the airport, helping getting them to the airport. And then we work with another organization called Miles for Migrants to help them get a flight to their final destination. So if anyone's interested in helping the cause, and you may not have the resources in terms of money, but you have an extra airline miles lying around, that's a really great organization that uses those miles to help migrants get to their final destination. So we were really lucky to work with Hamadi. We also helped connect him to healthcare here in Los Angeles before he left for his final destination. And our legal director, Nora Phillips, really stepped in and brought him food and clothing. And for our organization, it's really important to provide those holistic services whenever possible, because like I said, the legal services are very important, but then there's also all these other needs that people will have when they are released. And so we were really happy to be able to work with Hamadi and other asylum seekers and help them get released from Adelanto. And we're so grateful for this network of advocates that is helping people across the country. Thank you.
Houleye, do you want me to go?
Yeah, hey, sorry, I was having technical difficulties. Thank you so much, Sasha, for again, this very powerful testimony of what you guys have done for my community. We are very, very grateful for everything, all the support. It's like an army, like Rebecca was saying earlier. It's people who pay for the tickets, those who find them in the airports. And I hope Zainab could talk a little bit later about her own experience of translating and doing all kind of great things for my community and assisting people in airports and all sorts of stuff. And we are very, very grateful. Not just in Ohio, it's in California. It's people who are assisting us in the struggle, which is not easy. Thank you. And Lynn, you could take it from here.
So we've been talking about people who are initial asylum seekers for most of this time period, but we're going to talk just very briefly about people who have lived in the United States for decades, fled Mauritania during the genocide, came here, tried to get asylum. Some of them did not have representation. Some of them had poor representation. documentation problems, translation, interpretation problems, lost their cases, and then were deported. So I'm going to share my screen again. Share. And so for a long time, many Mauritanians were not being deported, even if they lost their asylum cases. A couple of reasons. One was that the country was dangerous for them. They were refugees. They had protested the government. They'd been tortured. So sending them back, even though they hadn't won their asylum case, would be dangerous. The other reason was that Mauritania does not recognize them as citizens and will not issue passports to them. Unfortunately, in the Trump administration, that changed. With threats over including Mauritania in the Muslim ban, the Mauritanian government agreed to start accepting people from deportation. And so you have some just really horrible stories, and some of which was documented in the media, but most of which are not. And it's definitely impacting Ohio and Ohio families in a major way. In addition to deportations, many people left and went to Canada because they were afraid of being deported, being in jail. And I'm going to share with you just some audio. Let's see which one. I think we might have only time for one. So I'm going to share this one with you. One of the first people deported back to Mauritania in the Trump administration. Just listen to how he was treated.
I was in the United States and lived there for 19 years. My wife is an American citizen. We have 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls. In 2017, when Donald Trump became president of America, I was jailed in Baltimore, specifically in April, for 2 months. I really suffered in this prison. I was really tired. I didn't eat. I spent my nights crying. During those 2 months of my imprisonment, I never saw a lawyer. Not even once. I did not see a judge either. ICE took me and deported me to Mauritania. When I arrived in Mauritania, the police made me very tired. They beat me and tortured me. Today I can't go anywhere. I spend my time hiding before they find me. If they find me, they will torture me even more than the times when they made me suffer, or they will kill me. Please, I ask you to help me get out of Mauritania. I have American citizen children who want to see their father before he dies. Here in this country, us blacks are mistreated. Blacks are considered slaves, children are taken as slaves, and women are tortured, even those who live there. Some don't even have farms to survive because their land has been taken from them by the government. We ran away from Mauritania about 20 years ago and had fled to the United States. They hate us the most. Wherever they see us, they will put us in prison and torture us. Please help us get out of this country. I am not the only one. Many of us are in the same situation, and we do not know each other because we are in hiding. Some of us have crossed the river and left to hide in Senegal and are suffering there. Others like me do not know where to go and are hiding here. I lived 19 years in America and committed no crime, and one day they arrested me without even checking to see if I had committed a crime or not. I am one of the first people deported back to Mauritania during the Trump administration. I had even asked not to be deported to Mauritania. I was afraid of being killed there. I told them that I have no paper and I risk being tortured there, but they did not listen to me. I did not have a lawyer. They did not seek that I see a judge. If saw a judge or had a lawyer or any legal representation and told them my fear of being deported, maybe I wouldn't have gone through this entire ordeal. I would never have been tortured. My children would have been by my side today. I was mistreated and I suffered. I was treated as a person who did not know his rights because I had no legal representation. Please help me.
Lynn, you're muted.
I know, I'm trying to get back to where I want to be. Yeah, I want you to listen to people also in their own voices. That was obviously a translation from what he said, but we have other people who speak in their own voices about this. And it's really makes you feel disgusting or disgusted about the way people are treated in jail, the way people are deported, and the way they're living now, and their families here. So we have a campaign called Reunite US. We want to bring them back. People deported to Mauritania and other people who shouldn't have been deported, they need to be back home. So my plug is for you to check out the hashtag Reunite US. Definitely contact me if you want to get involved. We have more audio testimonies and other things to share with you. And we have some test cases that we're organizing legal strategies around because the Biden administration actually can use its authority, executive authority, to allow people to come back in, even if they don't have a legal case. And, you know, we have these great statistics that show how awful the situation is, and thanks to Vera Institute and Track for the data. But again, in Ohio, people are 10 times more likely to have success in immigration court if they have a lawyer. And as you can see, the median bond amounts have just soared. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Stop share. I guess, and I'll turn it back to Houleye, but I do want to give just maybe a couple more thoughts of some asylum cases I've seen of people who were long-term US residents. And I also want to give another shout out to ABLE because they were really leading the charge to stop the deportation of long-term Black Mauritanians in 2018. And were able to get a tide change so that the deportation slowed down and many people are still here. But you basically, in asylum case, you have to, the judge gets to decide if they think you're credible or not. And so Tracy had mentioned something about a lot of Mauritanians having a December 31st or July 1 birth date. That's because dates, many people don't know when they were born, and dates are not as important in terms of a marker of time as they might be in a Western culture. So if somebody struggles over a date, they are deemed not credible. I was in one hearing where a person said that he crossed the river in a little boat, and then when he had to repeat the story, he said he'd crossed in a canoe. And this is through an interpreter, not his direct words. She said he was not credible, the judge, because she said that was different. A little boat and a canoe are different. I mean, I didn't know that, you know. Also, you've got people, if you're a Black Muslim man who's not crying in immigration court and describing in detail the severe torture that you went through, a white Christian, Western educated immigration judge says you're not traumatized with no training in any of this. So I'm going to have to stop because I'm taking up all the time, and we want to give some time for questions and answers from the audience. But thanks everybody for listening in on this. We have so much more to share on it, but we want to respect your time. Thanks, Houleye.
Thank you, Lynn. Absolutely, there is a different categories of what's going on. Of course, the ones who have been here for 20 years were torn away from their families, put in jails, deported in charter flights to a country that don't even recognize them as a citizen anymore. That's another issue. And thank you for sharing that powerful story as well. I would like to give Zainab Usal maybe a couple of minutes, 1 minute to if Zainab, do you want to say something? Or Alion, before we open this up for maybe a couple of minutes of questions. Zainab, I'm not sure if she's still here. Maybe not. So if people are, we would like to open the floor for the last couple of minutes for Q&A and then just last statements. And thank you so much for being here. So it was.
Okay. Hi. Thank you, Houleye. Thank you for being here to listen and hear our voices. What is going on with Mauritanian asylum seekers? Really appreciate all of you for being here today. So, as you said, the main issue is finding lawyers for our asylum seeker because they are in jail for, I can't say maybe the last one we had was more than 2 years being immigration custody in Atlanta, California. They can't go back and forth, seeing the judge, see the other lawyer, and then It's going to be going back and forth 5 times. I think the judge will going to be frustrated with the detainee, and they will end up be deported back to Mauritania, where they can face harm. So anything we can do today for awareness about this, and it's not only Mauritanian, because we are here for all immigrants who crossing the border or are detained in any immigration custody, to help them have their voices, because this is not okay. When I flee harms, my hope is to come to the United States to seek protection, but this is not happening. So we are here to help with language barriers. We have Houleye, she's doing an amazing job, 24/7. Anytime you guys need us, to reach us in Polar language, do not hesitate. We will be here to help any of you to be able to help others. And then it's true, Polar is very difficult, but Manharis is here. We will be able to help as much we can. And then, but we are asking again a way to find lawyers, because I know any asylum seeker is going to face the government, and then the government has a lawyer, but they don't have a lawyer. And then with the pandemic, we can see the low, like pro bono lawyers taking cases. So this reason, I think with the pandemic, 80% of our asylum seekers get denied their asylum because they could not find anyone to represent them. They will go to the judge and they will be sent home. So sent to their cell, going back and forth. And then the last thing to do, okay, you've been denied for asylum. And then this is what we want to prevent from the beginning, have someone to be able to be their voice, and have someone who stands with our asylum seeker in front of the judge. This is the only thing we're asking. And then thank you so much for each of you who've been here, stand with us side by side to help this immigrant. Thank you so much, really appreciate it.
Houleye, do you want me to read the questions? There was a question from Chloe about I see Eugenio responded. Well, let's bring it into this. Eugenio, if you could get off mute, or Maria or Emily. The question was regarding other reasons why Black Mauritanians were denied asylum. And, I think there's a lot of, let's talk a little bit about the people that from a long time, we can talk about the initial asylum seekers too, but we'd love to hear from Abel on that, I think.
Sure, I could start the conversation. So hi, it's Eugenio Molo. I work for Able out of our Toledo office. Our office has represented about a dozen Mauritanians over the past few years, mainly on defensive asylum. So as Lynn mentioned, they were longtime residents of Ohio and then apprehended by ICE at their check-in meetings. They weren't doing anything wrong that triggered ICE's detention. They were following what ICE told them to do. And then out of the blue, with this change in policy under the Trump administration, ICE would detain people at their check-in meetings. So we've litigated a few of these cases at the 6th Circuit and 2nd Circuit Court of Appeals. A number of them are still pending. A number of them we have lost. For the cases that we have lost, the clients are still in the United States, which, it isn't great news for them, but they're also really grateful that they have a lawyer fighting for them. So they're under an order of supervision by ICE. They're sort of in the same position they were in legally before they were detained by immigration. And common themes in those denials is that, like Houleye was saying in her comments, the situation and human rights violation in Mauritania, unfortunately, are not anything new. They've been going on for decades, which to me, and maybe to many of you, adds to the severity of the situation in Mauritania. But from a legal standpoint, when you reopen an asylum case, the standard in the regulation is that you need to show changed country conditions. And what immigration judges and the Sixth Circuit has said is that, Mr. Molo, you're right. The situation is really bad in Mauritania in 2019 and 2020. There is still race-based slavery. The human rights conditions are deplorable, as stated by the US Department of State. That's the situation in 2019 and 2020. That unfortunately is not changed from 2 decades prior when your client originally had his asylum case adjudicated. So they're deplorable conditions, they're bad conditions, but they're not changed country conditions. And that is being held against our clients. And then the second reason I'll briefly say is that they're adverse credibility findings. So my understanding is that from a few of our clients, they had someone help them complete their asylum application, and the person had a good heart, but didn't probably spend the requisite amount of time hiring an interpreter, using maybe an interpreter with the appropriate dialect. So they were writing our clients' responses 20 years ago on this asylum application. And then the asylum seeker has their hearing before the immigration judge. And what's written on paper is not exactly consistent with what that person is telling the immigration judge. And that inconsistency continues to haunt our clients. We have raised the argument that whatever happened 20 years ago should not be held against our client moving forward. We've made that argument and we've had mixed success with that argument. We've argued that the current fear of clients returning to Mauritania is different than the fear that they would have experienced 20 years ago. And again, sometimes that argument works, but sometimes it doesn't.
So much, Eugenio. And again, I echo Lynn on the importance and the tremendous work that ABLE has done to support our community. From in the heat of the deportations, the only firm or one of the few firms we saw were able to stand the best to guide us, because we had no idea what we were doing. We appreciate it. And Eugenio, like you said, there is definitely the issue of human rights is not new, and it continues from the 90s and the 80s, and sometimes it gets complicated when someone is writing an application for you, even if they have good intentions, and they either don't have the time or they don't have all the legal baggage, the legal expertise to be able to assist in that process. And we are glad that everyone is coming on board to make sure that we get these things right, hopefully soon. I know it's 1:07 and we would like to be respectful of everyone's time. It just shows that an hour is not enough to talk about this important issue, to tell these stories, to talk about the whole team again that is coming together to support Mauritanians in the US. We are very, very, very appreciative. Some of the things you can do, I know there were a few questions in the chat. We will make sure to respond individually to those people who have asked those questions. How can you help us learn more about Mauritania? If you are a student, if you are a journalist, learn more about Mauritania, write about Mauritania, tell the stories of Mauritanians. If you are an attorney, especially in Ohio, we need help. We have a whole list of people right now that came out 5 days ago that don't have lawyers in Ohio. It's not about just when they're in detention, it's also when they come out, because there is a whole process that they gotta follow once they come out to be able to pursue their case on the outside. There was a question about TPS. There is a toolkit. I have shared our social media information. You can share about Mauritania, talk about Mauritania, but also support TPS for Mauritanians, so that Mauritanians are not deported to a country that's gonna enslave them, that's gonna not recognize them, that's gonna put them as a second-class citizen, that's gonna abuse them on a daily basis. For the people who are in Columbus, for the elected officials who are here, there's a huge community of Mauritanians right here in Columbus that some of them have US citizenship, some of them don't, but they are a big voting bloc in Columbus, and we are in need of, again, services that are specific to Mauritanians. There is a huge number of Mauritanians, households that are illiterate, that cannot read or write. We need a community center that's going to tailor services to our community. We need an after school for our children. We need a place where our children can gather to learn the Quran, to learn our culture, to learn our languages, to know where they came from. We have been trying to get people to assist us with getting this as much as possible, because if there is a Mauritanian house in Columbus, Mauritanians will know when they get that letter that they cannot read, where to go when that child needs an after-school program, where to go when they get that immigration letter, someone to read it for them, where to go when they need a lawyer, where to go when they need a sponsor. So we do need a community center for Mauritanians in Columbus, and hopefully sometime soon, a good funder will come forward and assist us with this. Again, TPS is another one. Reunite us, help the people that were deported come back to their families. You heard that heartbreaking audio. And last but not least, hold Congress accountable, to hold the Mauritanian government accountable, because like an author said, you don't leave home unless home is the mouth of a shark. Mauritanians don't want to leave. If they have peace, if they have safety, if they're treated with dignity in their own country, they don't want to go anywhere. You don't leave families behind, parents behind, children behind, to go on an adventure where you know you're risking your life just because you want to. It's not a vacation. Immigration is a forced thing that people go through because there is a whole host of human rights abuse in the country. And Mauritanians are not an exception. It's been 60 years that this has been happening. We have cried out for help for 60 years. And the US has a relationship with Mauritania. It just push them to do the right thing. We're not asking for nothing extreme, just push the government to treat its people with dignity, respect, and equality. And Mauritanians will stay in Mauritania. Once again, thank you so much for being here today. We are truly appreciative of everyone who's supporting us through this struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, Houleye.
You're welcome.
Black et fier, mi wanna ben da min libé. Black missionnaire, mi wanna ben ye libé. Black no Césaire, no mobe men vinde. Dari nobe mum to the gondi, ha itere men ya ware black. Jetten mobe men sabu hande so en kebido. Foire ndi magu en dagal ben gopido. No wabi fodde fof jengoro di ben gasido. Hay sinno wadi jasbe ha hande en kebido. Yonta hande foti won ko pinale jangde. Yonta hande nafata dum ko pamale darnde. Jokude golle hay sabe ko marbe dole. Wasde yawde ha sabo eden pole. Nyaw men ko enen, nyaw men ko koye men, nyaw men ko be don class be ko bandirabe men. Be chali ko pinen, be kori ko pirten. Humi men ko de don jambe chopude dadi men. I'm black, I'm proud, I'm here to sing out loud for the people that remain in slavery and pain. I'm black, I'm proud, I'm here to sing out loud for the people that remain in slavery and pain. Be peji leki kon dadi mum ne nguri, be chopi leki kon pindi mum ne uri. Mone men fof ko audi, mone men fof ko tuturi. Ma encerte turki hay sodu dal ko urli. Min yurmi sen nègre de service jam fido leñol mum e dow jarabi kalis. Min hutti be nenrobe godi be ngala gache. Fon pobe pade Aziz ko alla woni doko nyagomo rokuma. Kanko woni kisno nyagomo wurnuma. Di magu yeye take so furi yarne take. Fam dum ade ne dagal welsim take. Nede yo fin yo tin yo fam. Nede yo hir yo hiu yo aw. Nede yo nyib yo ti yo wow. Papa mau mau jomi rabe ma nyaw. I'm black, I'm proud, I'm here to sing out loud for the people that remain in slavery and pain. I'm black, I'm proud, I'm here to sing out loud for the people that remain in slavery and pain. Son jimin wada hala wana burde mi min wawde. Son jimin wada yima wana welde mi min dande. Son jimin wada masla wana burde mi min fewde. Wana burde mi yide wonde, wana burde mi yide feinde. Neɗɗo fof on ko Allah itti totti ɗum. Neɗɗo fof mo Allah tagi wonno tafri ɗum. Jiyaɗo fof mo Allah wurni wonko resdi ɗum. Neɗɗo fof ka sukka mum ko mika iɗo ɓetti ɗum. men gande ɓe men doole ɓe o wiyon gande ɓe ga ko jawɗele ɓe ko finɓe famɓe ɓe ko fatɓe ɓerɗe ɓe ko noppi fatɓe woni rewɓe woni worɓe sen gori ni rendo men holno siforto sen gurdi ni gorondi holno asirto sen jari ni ronoɓe men holko titorto tarik mabɓe ɗeɗɗe mabɓe hol fof to ɓe tintorto gonen koye saaha pine ine moɗodira ɗemɗe ine moɗodira ɓiɓɓe yummane mbarodira gonen koye saaha sernaɓe ne mbarodira almameɓe mallodira calo gonga carodira holto kucciɗen e ngu maccungagu holto kucciɗen e ngu gañamtu magu holto payduɗen e taña meɗa magu nafi gagu walla fasi gagu yon tidarade moni fof yo andu kala yo haal bindo o yo windu bito yo witu jom dole o yo wallu no kegeɗal moni fof e kala nokku gure men ina laama gure men ina jima gese men ina ketta ɗemɗe men ina puyna gure men ina paɗa gure men ina nusta pine men ina guppa dine men ina ƴuppa holko haadi yimɓe nden tan gonna goto melene kumto hujaji mumen jolto holko haadi suka daro mawɗo fof to melene ƴellito ko mawɓe hanki ngawi ko yontande fof ene jogi saha mum yontande fof yo fin fella wolde mum jontaɗo fof yo fin remalore mum worɓe mum e rewɓe mum oto dakken gaño sago mum